Book of Joshua tonight. Joshua chapter number 4. We're down to verse 15 through 17. Joshua chapter number 4. Now recall, Joshua has been instructed to go and take the children of Israel across the Jordan. God instructed him how, and they have proceeded across, and we left them, the last time, having crossed, and they hasted to cross, seeing the men that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant here had to stand there until they got across. All right? Now, again, we mentioned how heavy this piece of furniture would be, this special piece of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, the two angels are solid gold. Everything else is coated in gold. Even the handles that carry it were coated in gold. So it had to be extremely heavy. And there's only room for like 4, maybe 6 carriers on this box. Now, remember, they by faith went first to the river. As soon as the priests of the feet hit the water, boom, it stood up on its end. It stopped flowing beneath, and it stood up. Recall again that the river's in flood stage, dangerous time to be trying to ford a river. Now, they couldn't build a bridge to cross this river. They didn't have time to engineer a roadway or a rock wall or anything like that. God told them to go across in 3 days, and now they're going across. So it's strange, however, that the ark led the way this time. And that's to show something to the children of Israel, that God was with them. All right? So here comes the priest. They step into the edge of the water, and boom, it dried up, stood on its end, and now they're standing in the middle of the river, and Israel crosses and makes haste to cross. Now you can imagine how many hours it would take to get that many people across. But look at the people, though. It says, let me find it here. Verse 10, it says, "For the priests which bear the ark stood in the midst of Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua." Now read this phrase. "And the people hasted and passed over." In other words, they didn't lollygag, did they? They didn't drag their feet. They didn't stand around and look at the rocks and look at the fish and look at everything around. They got across. It says they hasted. In other words, they put it in high gear getting across. Now you can understand how long it still would take them to get across. First, the armed men would have to go first, of course, to protect the procession. And then all the other tribes would be coming across, the old people, the young people, then finally the livestock. So you can imagine how long it took them to get across the river. I'd say hours upon hours upon hours. And remember, these guys that are holding this Ark of Covenant are standing right in the middle of the river. Joshua, remember, was instructed to have 12 men and to have one of each tribe pick up a rock and carry it with them across to the other side. And they were also instructed, Joshua also instructed them to take 12 rocks and make an altar kind of sign there in the middle of the river. So once they get across, down it says that the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the children of Israel. So the armed guys went first. Now why would they do that? Right, in case that enemy, like Jericho, was real close, decided they were going to ambush them as they come across. It would be real easy to ambush somebody that's trying to wade a swollen river, huh? It'd be very easy to ambush them. So the army would go first. The armed soldiers that had promised to fight for Israel will be going first so that they could take up positions to protect the rest of the nation. And they do so, and it says that about 40,000 prepared for war passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho. So 40,000 men went first. Now how long would that take to get across? Think about it. The whole time now, remember, the priests are where? Standing in the middle of the riverbed, holding the ark, waiting for this procession to get across. And all the rest of them had to cross. Now look at verse 15. They all get across. Verse 15 says, "And the Lord spake unto Joshua," all right, saying, "Command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony that they come up out of Jordan." All right, so God sends word to Joshua. And what does he say?
Tell the priests to come out of Jordan.
Yeah, come on up out of there. It's time to go. So now notice that the priest would not leave until they got command to do so. And that's important to see. They were obedient right up to the end, and they just didn't get quit because everybody gone by already. They were waiting for a command, a divine command from the Lord through Joshua to tell them to come on out. They didn't act according to their own impulse or initiate anything, but meekly waited on God's time. When you think about it, they've been standing there for hours holding this heavy box. But they did not quit. They did not move. They didn't say, we're done, let's go. They didn't do that. Now, what would have happened if they had done that and just said, hey, we're done, let's go? Whoosh. They'd have been picking them up way down close to the ocean because they had disobeyed God. And then there's no telling, the ark had gotten washed out too, huh? So they were obedient. They didn't take it upon themselves to say, okay, we're done, or I'm tired, let's get out of here, like a lot of people would have said. No, they waited until they got official word from God through Joshua to go across. All right? Now look at what it says here. Command the priests that bear the ark of testimony that they come up out of Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come ye up out of Jordan. All right, so Joshua hollers down at them that are standing out there, come on up out of there. All right, then what happens? Came to pass, when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord were come up out of the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up unto the dry land, that the waters of Jordan returned unto their place, and flowed over all his banks, as they did before. All right, let's look at that and see here that no sooner had their feet hit the other side of the riverbank. What happens?
Water flowed again.
Right. It resumed its normal thing, right? Now, why do you think it's important that God spends time recording this? Why is this important for us to see? Stop and think about it.
Teach us how to obey him.
Right. It teaches us how to obey him. It also accentuates or accents, as you were, accents the very miracle that God had just done for them. Now remember, he stood the water up on the end. Not the Israelites, not the priests, not the Ark of the Covenant. None of them had done that. It was God's hand with his people doing this miraculous supernatural event. There is no natural event here. This is a supernatural event, something that is beyond nature's ability. God told the river to stand still, and guess what happened? It stood still. It stopped the flow, which was abnormal. Think about it right now. Remember, it's in flood stage before they cross, and God stops it dead in its tracks. They cross on dry ground, and the priests come up out of there, and whoosh, it goes right back to the way it was. The only difference, the whole nation of Israel had crossed into Israel, into the promised land, and they had crossed on dry ground, and they'd left a pile of stones, 12 stones there where the priests had stood, and carried out 12 stones with them. And now they're on the other side. The priests have gotten up out of the river. So Israel could see now with their own eyes how that God had wrought unto them this miracle, and he confirmed the fact that he was the covenant-keeping God. Remember, God had told Joshua before they crossed the river, hey, you're going to cross the other side in 3 days. So what did Joshua say to his people? Right? He commanded them to cross, and they did. So God says you're going to go, they went. God says you're going to go across that river in 3 days, they went over in 3 days. Now think about this. God had promised them they were going over, and guess what? They went over. Just as he had promised they would do. So God is a covenant-keeping God. If God tells you he's going to do something, what does that mean to you? He's going to get her done, isn't he? He's going to get her done. God has promised many different things in the Word of God, and the best of the promises is that Jesus is coming back to get us. That he's going to come and get us and take us to be with him forever. When he comes and get us, it's not just for a taxi ride and then be done with us. No, we're going to be with him forever, the Word of God says. Think about that. God is coming to get us. He hasn't abandoned us. He hasn't forgotten us. He's going to help us bring on through that death and judgment and come on up into that glorious place called the heaven. But we're not going to stay there long. Remember that old heaven and the old earth. We read that this morning there in chapter 20. The old heaven and the old earth, what happens to it? They're gone. Out of there. They fled from the face of God. They were no more. They passed on. All right? Chapter 20 says there's a new heaven and a new earth come together, and then New Jerusalem comes down from the old heaven, comes down and rests upon the new earth. Boy, what a blessing. We have an eternal body, and we have a perfect eternal place to reside. Now, why does God have to, we made this point this morning, but why does God have to destroy the old heaven and the old earth? Right. Remember what happened in the Garden of Eden? Sin. The earth became what? Cursed. The earth was cursed in the Garden of Eden. And because of that, it will always be stained with sin. But God's going to deal with that and destroy the heavens and the earth all at one time and make a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem to come down upon that new earth. Think about that. God has kept his promises thus far for the people of Israel, and God has kept his promises for us. He saved us wonderfully. He promised to save us, and he did save us. We trusted in him. We trust in him with our whole hearts. We trust our eternal souls to his care and to his crucifixion work, his redeeming work, his atoning work. We trust him for those things. So here now, this view here in the river has a lot of meaning. Remember the word Jordan, the river, the name of Jordan, has a definite meaning. Death and destruction. Death and destruction. Now think about this, the symbolism of this. When we sing a song occasionally called When We Cross Over Jordan. Remember that? So the symbol there is that when Israel crossed over Jordan, where were they going into? The promised land, right? They were going into the promised land. So what happens when we cross over death and all of that into that eternal place? You see the parallel there, the spiritual parallel? We will be crossing over that death and that destruction, that judgment, that river. We'll be crossing over that river and going to an eternal place forever to be with our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's very important that we see this, that the priests stood there and bore up their course that they were challenged to do, their duty. They did their duty. So this is also symbolic of those that are faithful to the ministry they're called into. Not just preachers, but laymen as well. Teachers, singers, everybody involved in the work of God. If you're told to do something, be faithful to do it. And that will reveal the glory of God even more in the days to come. You think about that. These priests didn't move. They stood there like statues for hours upon hours and upon hours. Now, how many of you could do that? Think about that. Even when you were young and stout and full of vinegar, right? Think about how heavy that thing would be, and you have to stand out there for hours upon hours upon hours. I know I couldn't do it. Could you? Think about it. No. It took a supernatural strength for them to be able to do that. A supernatural strength to withhold the water, a supernatural strength and courage for these men to fulfill their mission, and they had that. God will give us the strength that we need to go through the rivers of our challenge of our life and to cross over into the other side in trust and comfort and confidence, knowing God's taking care of it. If we lay our heads down in those coffins and we pass on, we're going to pass over death. We're going to go on to that place, that special place that's promised to us called heaven, and ultimately that new Jerusalem where we will live and abide forever. So there's a lot of symbolism here, and that's why God spends so much time in these 2 chapters about passing over Jordan. God's servants remain faithful, and they remain blessed by God as long as they're doing their work. So all of us are called into the ministry. Basically, as Christians, we're all called to go and spread the gospel. If we'll be faithful to do our ministry, God will be faithful to give us the strength and the encouragement and the help that we need to accomplish that. Now, you think about how that the ministers and the people, the saints of God, are the salt of the earth. All right? We're the salt. Lori likes this one, the salt of the earth. Now, think about this. We are the salt that keeps the rest of the wicked, the corrupt, we hold back the judgment that comes upon the wicked by being here, performing our duty. And what is our duty as a Christian?
Carry on with the Lord's word.
Right, to carry on with the gospel work. Salt has been steadily diminishing in these last few centuries, decades. There's been more an increase of wickedness, an increase of sin, and fewer righteous people. So that's less and less salt, preserving these people from taking over the world. So sin has abounded more and more, and God's judgment has increased as well. So this Joshua 4:18 foreshadows the awful fact of that the grace of God, the age of grace in which we are in right now, this age of grace, will end. We're going to get across that river, and then what happens here after we leave from here in the rapture? What's the next stage that happens? Talked about it this morning. What happens after we are raptured out? What begins? Judgment and the tribulation. That's what tribulation is about. The judgment on the wickedness of the earth. The people on this earth, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, and the 10 kings and their armies that follow after him, the ones that persecute those who are saved during that time, the ones who torture, torment, and kill and martyr during this time. 2 halves of the tribulation period. The second half is called the Great Tribulation because that's when drastic things begin to affect the earth. God's going to take out a third of the trees, a third of the grass. What happens when you take out trees and grass? Oxygen starts getting a little thinner, doesn't it? So what's that mean? Harder and harder to breathe. Now what if you have asthma? And you get less and less oxygen? Boy, that's trouble, isn't it? Well, a third of the trees, a third of the grass, a third of the sun, and a third of the moon are darkened. So that affects the rest of the oxygen-producing plants. If the sun's darkened and the moon's darkened, there's less light, right? And then we see meteors begin to hit. We see drastic things begin to happen in that last 3.5 years. So what we see here is that this day or age of grace that we live in right now will come to an end, and then it's going to be terrible for the occupants of the world. It's going to be hard, especially if you name the name of Christ and refuse the mark of the beast. You're going to be slaughtered wholesale for your faith. But God's going to take care of vengeance, as we saw that this morning too. Remember, the saints under the fifth seal cry out for vengeance, and they're told, just wait a little while till your brothers have joined you. And sure enough, in chapter 7, you see that those that have come out, that great multitude that's saved during the Great Tribulation period, come out and join their brothers. Then what happens at the end of the tribulation period, it's marked by something important, and that is the battle of Armageddon. Remember, the two teams line up, and it ain't no football game. The two teams line up, the heavenly team and the earthly wicked team. There will be a battle such as never has been before. People will line up, and only one side's going to suffer any loss, and that's the side of wickedness. The leaders are going to be captured and thrown into the lake of fire. The rest of the army, what happens to the rest of the army? Right, they're slaughtered and they're bird food. Okay, they're slaughtered and they become food for the fowls of the air. So their leaders are in the lake of fire. The kings, all the way down to the privates, are now dead and in hell, awaiting the great white throne of judgment. Then one more shot at it the devil takes when he gets out of his prison after 1,000 years. Remember, he's loosed for a little season. He goes and calls the rest of mankind. They follow after him. Isn't that sad? For 1,000 years they've had Jesus Christ there. A perfect government, a perfect rule. He rules with a rod of iron. No slack, no nothing. Perfect. And they don't like that. Men don't like that. And they rebel against it because we have been rebellious ever since Grandpa Adam sinned in the garden. We've been rebellious. So mankind is at the peak of his depravity there when they can see Jesus, they can hear Jesus. If he'd allowed them, they could touch Jesus, they could smell Jesus, but yet we don't want him. Psalms 2. They imagine a vain thing, they conspire to get rid of Jesus, say, we don't want him to rule over us anymore. So the devil goes out after 1,000 years, and it doesn't take him very long. What's the next thing you see happen? Exactly. He's motivating men to rebel against God. So they encircle the camp of the saints there at Jerusalem. They encircle the breadth of the earth and say, we're going to get you now. And then what does God do to prove them wrong? The fire of God falls from heaven, right? And destroys that entire army. Every single person that's in that army, instant fire destruction. And that's just a taste. They get that instant destruction. They lift up their eyes, are in hell. But then what's the next thing they see? They go through the gate. It's unlocked. They go through the gate. They say, all right, we're getting out of here. They're going to the great white throne of judgment. There they'll be judged for their sins. Then they'll be escorted into that place called the lake of fire. So you see, this crossing is symbolic of a lot of things. How that the saints of God one day are going to cross over onto the other side. And how that God was going to take care of business after that. And we'll see many things that begin to happen now to the children of Israel as they get, now they're actually in the promised land. And things are going to start happening pretty quick. So study ahead and read. Their first camp, I'll give you a clue, is in Gilgal. 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 That's where they camp the first day. And that is where they set up the marker where they crossed the Jordan River. Okay? So they've set up the stones, the 12 stones, as a marker, as a testimony, and we call that an Ebenezer, to mark where they crossed the River Jordan, but also as a testimony to the sovereign hand of God doing mighty works and keeping his covenant promise to Abraham, and to all those after him, that he would bring them home to that place called Israel. And we see things are going to start happening. A lot of things are going to start happening now in Joshua, and we'll see a lot of battles taking place. But we'll see how God helps Israel ultimately to win. Joshua gets to be an old man, and he dies. When he dies, they're at peace. Okay? And others take over. But you'll find once those elders pass on, what happens to Israel? Boy, they get backslid, don't they?
Yeah, for a while.
Right. You read on in the book of Judges, you'll see that phrase, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. That's no good, is it? There has to be a standard of righteousness. And it's not our standard. Whose standard is it? God's standard. Every man must do what's right in God's eyes, not his eyes. Because our hearts, remember, are deceitful and wicked above all things. So that means that we can't trust in our hearts to do what's right. We must trust in God to show us what to do and to do it right. So we must abide by God's laws and not our own. So think about that as we read ahead now. Go ahead and finish reading chapter 4. We'll finish that up, and then we'll go on, resume in chapter number 5. So think about that this week. All right, let's all stand.